Namaskar, hello everyone. This is the 15th session of this prestigious literary festival, in which we will hear 4 papers. This session is presiding over by Keshav Sigdalji from Nepal, and the participants are Chiranjeev Singh from India, Samantha Ilangpunji from Sri Lanka, Daya Disha Naikeji from Sri Lanka, and of course Keshav Sigdalji. I request you to all, first you introduce yourself in brief and then present your paper. So I request to Keshoji to kindly proceed this.
Thank you, Honorable President of FOSUAL, Madam Ajit Kaur, and representative from Sahitya Academy, fellow presenters. We have eminent scholar Chiranjeev Singh from India, and we have more friends from Sri Lanka to join. I feel honored to join you all in this August conference taking place in virtual mode. I thank FOSUAL and Sahitya Academy for their continuous effort to bring the literati and the academics from the BIMSTEC region and make possible a constructive dialogue fellow presenters, we have and humanity. And scholar Chiranjeev Singh from India, and we have more friends from Sri Lanka to join.
Sir, आपका YouTube चल रहा है शायद आप बंद कर दें.
No, nothing is running from my side.
Okay, please.
So I welcome you all. I thank you all. Should I start by reading my one paper? Is it okay?
Yes, sir, please.
Okay, thank you. So I'll briefly try to summarize the main idea of my paper, and my paper will be around contemporary Nepali poetry writing against the grain. Contemporary Nepali poetry has exhibited a strong sense of rupture from the tradition it has moved along. In this brief presentation, I will discuss some selected poets actively producing poetry in the post-1990s. This period has both strategic and functional significance due to the immense socio-political upheavals, and to be more precise, a decade-long armed struggle that consequently led to the overthrowing of almost 2.5-century-long monarchy, thus making Nepal a democratic republic. This political rupture has subtle and intrinsic as well as concrete and explicit corollary in the literary productions of our times. Nepali poetry in the past had a very strong sense of bhakti, devotion, which initially began with the devotion to God, and then gradually appeared in the expressively patriotic poems, bhakti to the nation. And because the concept of nation was very abstract, this devotion could only be represented by the act of sacrifice of great warriors, and thus we had the images of the heroes. Of course, the context and nature of the hero changed in the course of time, but we continued to look for the heroes and even constructed them for our own conveniences and celebrated their heroism. The recent political rupture has added 2 key features to contemporary Nepali poetry. Because we have dismantled the images of the heroes, we are also lost being unable to navigate ourselves. We therefore are trying to trace our roots in the hills and the plains, rocks and the meadows. We sit by the side of a pond and contemplate on our own reflections blurred by the waves as we steer the still surface of water. We steer the water because we are reluctant to see our real self, or more importantly, we do not believe those reflections to be ourselves. But we need to tell our stories because we want to be assured that we too exist. We never realized that our own images were dismantled while we uprooted the statues of our own heroes. We want to rebuild our new images And this demands that we write about ourselves, our own stories, about our families, our villages, our lullabies, and the Ropai Git, the cultivation songs. One of the distinctive modes of contemporary Nepali poetry thus turned out to be autobiographical. The other remarkable transition can be traced in its shift from the universal to the international. Needless to say, modern information technology has dismantled territorial barriers in terms of cultural dialogues. We have web magazines, e-journals, blogs, and interestingly, many of us attempt our first poem on Facebook or other social sites rather than keeping a qualm over what we have privately scribbled in our notebooks. We talk about how the Australian government is revamping its migration policies, or how the resurgence of Kejriwal in New Delhi excites us with the power of the commoners, or how Rajapaksa stumbles over an unexpected loss in Sri Lanka, or how we feel so connected with the Nepali-speaking population in Burma. We will grieve the rape of a young girl in Delhi, or or the massacre of school children in Afghanistan. We reach beyond our physical territory. Obviously, it has been stressed. We have broadened our outlook and scope, but we have become even more specific and objective to talk about those issues. We do not impose the same values and standards to talk about them anymore. And this is what marks our shifts from the universal to the international, very evident in contemporary Nepali poetry. Poet Usha Shetson, in her poem, "These days man is aching into my heart," talks about the horror of wars we live with. She is troubled, we are troubled, and people elsewhere are troubled too, in Palestine, in Ethiopia, in Beirut, in Kashmir, and in Sri Lanka. Is it the death that has troubled us? Do we fear the death? Do we mourn the loss of our people? Questions are abundant, but answers are elusive. It only takes one gust of the wind, the poet writes. I quote her, "The procession did not come. There is no clicking of heart speed. There is no color of weddings. There is no youth-fed heat." Or consider poet Krishna Prasad's poem, My Father in Reverie. Migration is a prominent phenomenon worldwide. Migration takes us to an adventurous land. It is both exciting and scary. Poet Prasad brings multiple layers of consciousness into the poem. I quote his poem, "He saw a town before anyone in the village did, sold from the hand of his own villager. At a sport in Ghum Pahar, he set for Dehradun, Kashmir, Malay, and beyond, with a gun sent in hand by a foreigner, dropped his middle name Prasad and adopted Bahadur, and only then he started comprehending what a foreign land was." The upshoot of modernity manifests in migration to the cities, in modern warfare with guns, in the metamorphosis of the individuality, and in the consciousness back to the roots. The canvas gets larger, but each color on the canvas is given the agency. Poet Momila will use a completely different metaphor to speak of these experiences of our times. She is more benign and soft in her expressions, but the images are stark and violent. She stirs the water she is looking at. Hers is an attempt to peep inside her soul. You need to break the external crust to break inside. And a violent jerk is almost justified. In her poem, Life is All But Water, Momila writes, "And when sizzling I get hot and burn, a flame besieged me from within. Nuptial or funeral processions both went alike for me, for I meekly spilled out of the eyes." What else would be better explain? What else would better explain how we are sizzled by the time we live in? The nuptial ties are reduced to mere rituals, and they lack the devotion and faith the relation commands. The funerals are like auctions to the sky. Values are eroded, and how do we restore it? And in her poem, Only When a Branch is Axed, Momila seems to give us an answer. I quote, "Only when a branch is axed, things beyond our imagination happen." She lets the personal flow into the public. Poet Hemanta Bivas, on the other hand, exploits poetry to celebrate the soil and the toils of the subalterns. He sings for his country that comprises of farmers, plowmen, porters, and working class lords. He provides agency to the subaltern characters in his poems that disowns the age-long humiliation on social and economic grounds. In one of his poems titled Plowman, He writes, I quote him, I know, my good Lord, from the top of your mansion up above, you won't be able to see me clearly as I stand on the floor, fathoms down, here on the road, and yet I know too well your skyscraping boudoir stands nowhere but on the soil where I stand right now. Our time is violent, and we are left with no option but to negotiate with it. And we have continually made efforts to heal the wounds, patch the pits. We have given agencies to natural entities like rivers and mountains to bring us together. We forge a new connectivity through these agencies. Poet Krishu Chetri contrasts ever cold and liquid water with a fire inside the water. He reminds us civilization has flourished by waters, and readily we have an apprehension that civilizations are also destroyed by the tsunamis in the water. So in the poem Water, the poet warns us, I quote, do not obstruct water. Water has its own course. We live with the external potential of the water and the perennial fear it creates. Contemporary Nepali poems bring both aggression and humility. These aggressions are there, as I have previously suggested, to break the crust and to see oneself. Fulman Bal is a poet who attempts to question the normalcy. In his poem, The Human Kingdom, Bal writes, don't you know that when there's a draught of compassion, fire spills all over the kingdom of life, rises in flames, and haunts for every beat of harmony. The poet very consciously tries to remind us of the crisis that is to befall us if we do not heed to the fire. Implicitly, the poet urges us to pass the pit hole. He tells us the gravity of the problem. That means no rose ever opens up. Let the water pacify it before the fire engulfs it. The poems I discussed above to a large extent represent the prominent mode of contemporary Nepali poetry, which is evident of the paradigm shift that is undergoing in terms of treatment and techniques, if not the subject matter. One of the challenges in Nepali poetry will be to ensure how the artistic crafts in autobiographical mode can keep itself distinct from the piles of everyday grudges, which can easily come out in the form of poetry book as we practice liberal publishing policies. The other challenge will be to save the international mode from being merely reduced to the reportage of television and radio reports on global events. I see that there are a lot of reasons to be optimistic about Nepali poetry in specific. First, a host of new and young creative poets have strongly made their presence felt. Second, there are many attempts to take poetry to the public through public readings, publications, and especially spaces for poetry in print and electronic media. Thirdly, poetry has proved its potential to mobilize political power. The People's Movement of 2005 was an example of how poetry could galvanize people for a cause. Another silver line is added by those poets and academics like Abhi Subedi, Govinda Bhattrai, Keshav Sigdel, Mahesh Paudel, and Balram Adhikari that have been making efforts to translate Nepali poems for international audience as a gateway for global cultural interaction. Similarly, we can hope that initiatives to organize poetry reading in public obviously facilitates poetry to get closer to the public. Thank you. So I won't wind up my presentations for now. Thank you for patiently listening to me.
थैंक यू केशव जी, आपने बहुत ही अच्छे तरीके से और वैश्विक परिप्रेक्ष्य में जो बहुत सारी हमारी समय की समस्याएं हैं जो समकाल को एक त्रासद माहौल में बदल रही हैं, उनके परिप्रेक्ष्य में जिस तरह से नेपाली कविता की सामने जो चुनौतियां हैं और जो उसने अपनी प्रासंगिकता तय की है उसको बहुत अच्छे तरीके से अपने पेपर में व्यक्त किया. थैंक यू सर. नाउ आई रिक्वेस्ट टू eminent writer Shri Chiranjeev Singh ji to kindly present his paper.
Thank you, and greetings to all of you. Namaskar. We are meeting on this auspicious day, the birthday of Guru Nanak, whom a Pakistani scholar, Mushtaq Sufi, called the greatest person born in the last 1,000 years, and about whom Rabindranath Tagore told Balraj Sahni that while he had written an anthem for India, Guru Nanak had written the anthem for the universe. He was referring to his composition in Rag Dhanasri, the first verse of which is sky the salver, the sun and the moon lamps, star the pearls, incense the fragrant breeze from the sandal-wooded forests. Tagore translated this composition into Bengali. So, greetings to all on the 553rd birthday of the great Guru. I am thankful to Madam Ajit Kaur ji for inviting me to speak today. She is the moving spirit behind the foundation of SAK writers and literature. So great is her commitment to the foundation that her frail health is no hindrance to its projects. May she continue to guide the foundation for long. Thanks are due to the Sahitya Academy for enabling this festival to take place. The topic of my paper is, which was given to me, our literature, ancient and contemporary. To talk about literature of all the Indian languages in one short paper is an impossible task. According to the People's Linguistic Survey of India, conducted by G.N. Devi and his team of researchers, currently there are 780 languages in India. Of these 780 languages, 480 are languages of tribal and nomadic people. Many of the tribal languages do not have a script and written literature, but they have rich oral literature, including oral epics. Each language requires a separate paper. In a short paper, one can only make some broad and impressionistic generalizations. The great scholar and novelist Acharya Hazari Prasad Dwivedi used to say that the entire classical literature of India was contained in 2.5 books: the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, and Brihat Katha of Gunadhya, only a portion of which is extant, thus 2.5. Most of the themes of classical literature have come from them, whether in Kalidasa or Bhasa or Magha and other classical writers. G.N. Devi says, the grip that the Ramayana and the Mahabharata have over the minds, memories, imaginations, and identities of Indians has no parallel in the literary history in India or in other literary tradition. For historic reasons, the Tamil Sangam literature, Punjabi, Sindhi, Urdu, and Northeastern tribal literature is an exception to this. But even in Tamil Nadu, Mahabharata is part of the oral folk literature, especially the cult of Draupadi. A notable feature of the Indian literary landscape is the oral literature of the tribal people. All the living 480 tribal languages have rich oral literature, some of which is now being documented and published. Some tribal languages have rediscovered their old scripts and writers are using them. For example, the scripts of Santhali and Bhili and Gondi. In some cases, scripts are being adapted or devised for languages which did not have a script. The emerging tribal and Dalit literature is a notable part of the contemporary literature. The oral epics differ from the two classical epics in many respects. For example, in the Bhil Mahabharat of the Bhil tribals in Gujarat, Vasuki, the serpent king, has a passionate affair with Draupadi. Arjuna, the husband, tied to the bedpost watches helplessly their lovemaking. This oral epic has now been compiled by Bhagwan Das Patel. In this version, there is no sermon of Gita. In a tribal version of the Ramayana, it is Lakshmana who has to prove his chastity by the ordeal, fire ordeal, and not Sita. In one tribal version, Sita kills Ravana. In another version, Ravana is the hero and Rama the anti-hero. The folk and oral literature is significant in quantity as well as quality. To give you an idea, here are a few short examples. The first two are tribal songs from Odisha, translated by Sitakant Mahapatra, himself a noted writer and poet. He plays his flute on the hill as I fill my pitcher in the fount. How do I go there, leaving my pitcher? How do I withstand the flute's call? He plays his flute on the hill. The second one is the boatman's daughter, how she sways like a leaf in the wind, even before the drum strikes a beat. Her body is as soft as the dove's breast, her lips red like the palash flower. Her body sways like a leaf in the wind. And the third example is from the Bhil tribe of Madhya Pradesh and Rajasthan. Ishwar Raja has white bull Nandi. Who will tie him? Who will feed him? Who will give him water? Ishwar is in meditation. Dear Gaura will give him water. Gaura gave him water. Nandi shook his head. His horns tore Gaura's sari. Gaura says, "Oh blessed Nandi, I cared for you, but you tore my sari. Now you tell people how the sari was torn. Otherwise, all kinds of things they will say. Women should look to their own good before doing good to others. Only women are blamed, not men." Besides their deities, tribal people have their own take on the mainstream gods, Shiva, Parvati, Rama, Sita, and Hanuman, as can be seen from the examples given above. Arguably, the roots of this literature, unwritten though it was, go back to the Harappan civilization. Vedic Sanskrit came with the Aryans who supplanted them. Vedic compositions were first composed in the Punjab. Rig Veda, the oldest and the first of the four Veda, has magnificent nature poetry, hymns to Aryan gods, songs about kings and conquests, and rituals and sacrifices. The authors of these hymns were 329 male rishis and 27 female rishikas. These hymns were also orally composed and orally passed on. As Stephanie Jamieson and Joel Brereton, who have translated recently Rig Veda into English, have written, the Rig Veda is not only the beginning, but also one of the paramount expressions of both the religious tradition and the literary tradition. Combining these two roles in a text that displays great variety, skill, and beauty. From the Rig Veda downwards, religious tradition and literary tradition have been intertwined. The Jaina tradition gave us Tiruvalluvar's Tirukural in Tamil, the first epics of Pampa, Ranna, and Janna in Kannada. The Shaiva tradition gave us the Nayanmar's compositions in Tamil and the Vachana literature in Kannada. The Vaishnav tradition gave us the Alvar's compositions in Tamil and Dasa Sahitya in Kannada, the various versions of the Bhagavad Purana in many languages. The large Krishna Bhakti literature in Braj Bhasha, Gujarati, Rajasthani, and other languages, the Nathpanthi literature of the Naths, the Bhakti literature of Kabir Ji, Ravidas Ji, and other saint poets, the Varkari saint poets of Maharashtra, the compositions of the Gurus of the Sikh Panth, the Sufi literature of Punjab, and so on. Each of these traditions has produced literature of great spiritual heights and beauty. As mentioned earlier, religious tradition and literary tradition have been combined in all the Indian languages. Colonialism impacted these parallel traditions of classical and popular literature profoundly. The impact of Western literature fundamentally changed the Indian literature. In India, printing technology and colonialism came together, and the form and content of literature changed fundamentally. Novel, short story, drama, poetry, and prose writing proliferated. Great writers like Tagore, Qazi Nazrul Islam, Subramanya Bharati, Kalki, Fakir Mohan Senapati, Bhai Veer Singh, Premchand, Bendre, Kuvempu, Kusumagraj, Shivram Karant, Shivram Karant, Uma Shankar Joshi, Vibhuti Bhushan Bandyopadhyay, K.M. Munshi, Kalki, Takhali Shankar Pillai, Jaishankar Prasad, Thaniram Chatrik, and many others. In each language, these great writers emerged. But now the influence of English is becoming dominant. Will Indian writing in English be the face of the contemporary Indian literature? One will have to see. Marxism, existentialism, and Freudian psychoanalysis have all influenced the contemporary literature. Breakdown of traditional societies and values, urbanization and alienation are the themes present in all contemporary literatures in India. The impact of IT is beginning to be felt. As a result, language is changing, literature is changing as the society is changing. Thank you very much.
थैंक यू सर। बहुत ही अच्छा पेपर आपने पढ़ा और पूरे भारतीय साहित्य का एक स्वरूप हमारे सामने प्रस्तुत कर दिया। मैं बहुत ही आदर व्यक्त करता हूं आप दोनों ही विद्वानों के प्रति, आदरणीय केशव सिकदल जी और चिरंजीव सिंह जी के प्रति। आप दोनों के प्रति साहित्य अकादमी और फोसवाल की तरफ से बहुत ही आभार। नमस्कार, धन्यवाद।